Thank you, Mimi, and thank you for inviting me here. This has actually been a really fun talk to prepare for, mainly because I was like, oh, the people that do RCTs will be there and I can talk about this, and the people who really love math teaching will be there and I can talk about this too. And so it's been really kind of fun. And also to talk about null results, which I know is some folks from, well, probably a lot of these people in this room have run into a null result study. I know there's been people writing about null results from this university, so I'm excited to get feedback because I'm talking about work in progress. So the paper's about 3/4 completed. And it would be good if the paper doesn't hold water for you guys to tell me that now, and I'll just stop writing. So this is work that I'm doing with Rob and Jacob at the University of Michigan and Doug Corey, who's at Brigham Young University. And I'm not a woman of mystery. As you know, like the study has null results. So what I'm actually going to do is, what's my stake in this? So we've run, so like in 2008, like everybody else, we were like, let's do an RCT. We found a program. It was not our own program. It's Marilyn Burns Math Solutions, and they agreed to be part of an RCT. And we thought, like, this will be a contribution. Like, if it's effective, then we'll be able to tell districts this is something that you can adopt and improve mathematics instruction. We never really considered the null case, so that wasn't really kind of a, what if this is not working? What are we going to do with the data? But we spent 5 years and $5 million collecting data for this study. And I would like to actually say that we can learn something from null results. And so that's kind of where we've been at in our thinking is, given that you've run a null results study, is there anything that you can say about what causes the null results that would be helpful to the field? So just as when a program works, you can't say exactly what about that program works. Like you can't say, oh, it was the fact that Paul Cobb designed it, or that Bethany Riddle Johnson did the student materials, right? Because it's a package. Well, the same thing is true of any null result. Like there's many, many different facets that you can't really say, oh, it was this as opposed to that. So I think that what we're going to try to do, though, is make the case that you, through some disciplined inquiry, can get somewhere, especially if you have the right kind of data, can get somewhere in trying to rule out hypotheses for what went wrong and what could have caused the null results. So I'm going to, just as a shape of the talk, I'm going to talk about kind of the brass ring and professional development, like you're on the merry-go-round and you want that positive effect from your study, just as an orientation to the PD literature. I'll describe the program and I'll show you kind of our immediate outcomes from the program. And then I'm going to go through and structure a series of hypotheses and go through the evidence about why we could have seen null results emerge from this. Okay. So professional development is both, as David Cohen likes to say about teaching, but this is also true of professional development, simultaneously both the solution and the problem, right? So it's seen as the major method for instructional improvement in the US, but teachers report pretty weak offerings. If you go to a lot of district professional development, it can be unimpressive in terms of what the providers are actually telling teachers. You see mixed results from single program evaluations. You see Tom Carpenter's studies of CGI, successful. Paul Cobb had a study in the 90s that showed positive results. But Bill Penwell, almost anything he does works really well. Joan Heller also seems to be onto something. But then you get sort of the two Mike Garrett studies, like big PD studies. Rosella Santagata, who was evaluating Lesson Lab. So this is, it seems like it's a very hit or miss in the research literature. You also see when economists get big data sets, that if they're able to draw out of those data sets a measure of teachers' professional development, you generally don't see that that's related to student outcomes, construed as value added. So as I said, in 2008, we thought this program is probably pretty good. Let's learn about the specific program, and would we be able to catch the brass ring? Because even though we didn't develop the program, we kind of thought this would be neat if we're able to contribute to this conversation. So this is the program. It's Math Solutions. It was founded in 1984 by Marilyn Burns, who is in the math ed field. She's more of a mathematician or mathematically trained person than an educationally trained person. It's a relatively big program. It's served over 600 districts in 48 states, and that's actually old data from around the time of the study, so they probably have done now more. And the central goals of the program include helping teachers to enact ambitious instruction. So I'm going to define ambitious instruction for a minute so that you guys, because that's our dependent variable in some of what we're talking about. So when we say ambitious instruction, what I'm looking for is, or what we're describing is instruction in which the cognitive demand of the work for students is elevated. So kids are asking mathematical questions, they're providing mathematical explanations, they're working on high cognitive demand tasks that the teacher isn't spoon-feeding them, procedures that the kids are actually thinking about how to solve math problems. The teacher is also using kids' ideas and threading those ideas through the lesson. So they take up, Mimi, your idea, actually, you're onto something. Can you say it again? Or can somebody restate that? Or let me extend that. And then the mathematics itself is high quality. So there are mathematical explanations. There's multiple methods used. Those multiple methods are compared to one another. There are representations, and the representations are linked because there's a lot of psych literature on how linked representations matters to student outcomes. So that's what we were looking for. That's what the program wanted to enact. And so from our perspective, it was a relatively good fit between the instruments that we had available for measuring classroom instruction and what the program was up to. So what the program does is it teaches teachers, or the sort of goal is ambitious instruction, but the sort of theory through which that works is if you teach teachers more math, if you teach teachers how students or how kids learn math, and if you give them or sort of develop some tasks that they can use in the classroom to enact more ambitious instruction, then they will go forth and improve their instructional quality. So the math solutions team, when they come into a district, typically consults with a district and says, like, what are your needs? Like, what are the state tests telling you? You're weak in geometry, we can address that. If you're sort of are stuck in this issue, we can address that. So it's semi-customized, although when we started working with the providers, you could tell that the providers were taking pre-made modules, essentially, which makes sense from their perspective. They don't want to invent something from scratch every time they go out and work. And at the time of the study, the major form of professional development that they provided was to have teachers attend both summer institutes. These are 4-day summer institutes where teachers come all day for 4 days. They learn these 3 things, and then participate in additional training days over the course of the year. In this particular study, it was about 6. So here's some, to do the study, I'll just tell you the details about how we did the study. So first, we ended up, because a district pulled out at the last minute, we ended up in what I would say as a friendly district on the Atlantic coast, meaning that Math Solutions had been there before, about 5 years before the study. And in fact, it was hard, not that hard, but we had to do a little work to navigate around recruiting in schools where teachers had already had the program, which is what we did not want. We didn't want pre-treated teachers. We ended up with 18 schools, and we did within-school random assignment of 4th and 5th grade teachers. And that gives us the sort of state test scores for those teachers. We had one cohort start in 2010, 2011 with 87 teachers. And is that me, or is that just your system? Oh, it's just the system. So I'll just keep talking. Because of attrition, and you'll see the attrition numbers shortly, we added a second cohort of teachers that began in 2011, 2012. Teachers in cohort 1 experienced 3 years of the program, and teachers in cohort 2 experienced 2 years of the program. So teachers could have up to 3 years of PD. Okay, so here are the data collection instruments that we used. So we, for some reason, decided to develop our own student assessment for this and another project. I will never, ever do that again. Don't ever, ever do that. It's no fun. And you're not going to be very good at it, which is what I realized. Maybe you will, but I was not very good at it. We gave that every fall and spring. And I should say the blue checks are data that we will be talking about at least briefly today in the talk. The district obviously was administering state assessments. We have that data. We gave teachers the mathematical knowledge for teaching assessment at baseline. That's entry into the study. And then every spring subsequently over the 3 years of PD. We had video observations of teachers' instructional practice. And we had 6 lessons per teacher per year. After they taught the lesson, they filled out a log for us that told us what curriculum material they were using, how they felt the lesson went. We only were able to collect that video in treatment teacher classrooms in the first 2 years, and then we did treatment and control in the 3rd year. At the time we funded the study, video was much more expensive than it was now. So the cost of video has dropped from about $1,000 a lesson to more like $200 a lesson in the last 5 years, mostly thanks to the MET study, actually, and the sort of development of these like small portable video data collection components. So we were stuck not having the original control group video. So we did exit interviews with teachers who were left in the program at the very end of the program. And we also talked to the professional development providers. When we got the results, we had a conversation with them first about the results, and then we had a second conversation, a follow-up conversation about kind of how they interpreted the results and what they thought was going on in the district. Okay. So here's the sample size and attrition, and you can see, so at baseline, we combined cohort 1 and 2, and at baseline we had about 102 teachers, and then at the end of the third year we had about 43 teachers. So that's probably not that unusual. I called that normal the other day, and my colleagues laughed, and they were like, yeah, okay, that looks sort of normal. I think in this particular case, a lot of the attrition was caused by principals moving teachers among grade levels. That was kind of what was done in this district, was to move teachers to shake things up in their classroom. I have an enterprise, I got really mad about this at one point. I had, sorry, this is a tangent, but I said to one of my enterprising doc students, like, that has to mean that they take a hit on their value-added score. Like, I cannot see that a teacher would be as effective teaching a new grade level as they are. It's like the novice teacher thing. And sure enough, like he had LAUSD data. He went in and he identified a hit that teachers take when they move into a new grade. Within a couple of years, they're back up to their previous level of productivity. But the principal's theory, at least in the short term, was not a theory that was particularly effective for their schools. They didn't, I don't think they knew. Anyway, so a lot of it was grade switching. Some of it was teachers leaving the district. And as far as we could tell, none of it was like, I hate the program and I'm dropping it. But we will never know for sure. OK, so here's the treatment. Like I said, they had these summer institutes. They had professional development days during the school year. Teacher participation did decrease over time, and I'm going to talk about that as one of the things that could be contributing to the null results. So I'll cover that a little bit more as we go on. The content of the PD was interesting. So I would say it's part revival meeting, like in the sense of like, let's all get on board with the way that we think kids learn. And they would actually read text from Marilyn Burns in this kind of tone of awe, like our leader has written this and we will kind of believe it and it's so powerful. And then part of it was more task-oriented. With the teachers doing the tasks that were in the Math Solutions materials, like here's an activity with the manipulatives and multiplication, or manipulatives and fractions, talking about their implications and coordinating with the kind of district guidance. So they have a new pacing guide, like how do you work this into the pacing guide, that kind of thing. Okay, so here's the short story on our impacts. So this is the scale, this is the mathematical knowledge for teaching assessment that I and Deborah Ball developed at Michigan while I was there. And it measures teachers' kind of like familiarity with the content that they'll be teaching, not just the straight content, but like the tasks of teaching. Like when a kid says something to you, like my son at the dinner table the other night was like, can you have negative remainders? Like 6 divided by 7 is 6 remainder -1. And I was like, oh God. Then I had to call my math friends. But like that's the kind of thing that if you're a teacher, you don't want to be like giving the kid the wrong answer. It turns out you're not allowed to, but by definition, I guess. But that's the kind of thing that's on that assessment. And so here's actually, we do see an impact on teachers' mathematical knowledge for teaching, which is significant. This is actually year 2 of the study. Treatment teachers start off quite below the control group teachers, but they've reversed that by the third year of the study, and we had sufficient sample size at that point that was significant. The effect size is about 0.4. But the effect size remains roughly the same in the following year. However, the sample size had dropped so much that it's out of significance. And mainly in the paper that we wrote about this, we present these sort of year 3 data instead of, year 2 data instead of year 3 data, just because when Robin Jacob looks at she's the evaluator in the project, when she looks at the year 3 attrition, she's not bugged by the attrition itself, but she sees the differential attrition, and she just is like, worthless. So it's pretty depressing to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. Because yeah, go ahead.
So looking at that, it looks like you might have some imbalance at the baseline, right?
I think so. Do we know why?
It seems like a big difference for randomized.
Sorry?
Had some of the control been through the treatment 5 years before?
No, we stayed away from teachers who had been, there's like one or two that went through the treatment before. We could kind of tell from their interviews. It could be that this is a result of attrition. So that would be this is a good question, actually. You probably need to track this down.
It suggests you have attrition, non-random attrition, right? I mean,
yes.
the people, you could have been balanced with a full sample, but the people
Right.
that stayed in the control group versus treatment.
Yeah. I think that that's one hypothesis. And actually, I'll send you Robin's paper on this. Like I did not do this analysis, but I think we should probably check for that exact issue, because that could be part of what's going on. Because at baseline, there was, that table 1 where you sort of check everything at baseline, there was not a difference that looked like this.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, that this was constructed from like an unbalanced, yeah. Okay, but I think, well, you can take it up with Robin. So.
But in other words, this table is conditional on lasting through the final.
It can't, that could not be the, I think it doesn't like me to stand there. I don't think that could be the case, actually. I think, but I did not construct this, so. But I will send you the paper, and you can communicate. We found null results mainly, so this was kind of like all right, at least one thing worked. This was number and operations. We found null result in geometry, so there was a separate geometry assessment. Oh, go ahead.
Interrupt you one more. You couldn't
Yeah.
get null effects just because of the starting baseline, right? I mean, if there's a 0.2 of it.
Well, but you could, okay, so one thing is I just noticed that the treatment control sizes are on here, and so this is with people who completed the program. However, the actual effect size that I reported as 0.4 is reported in year 2 when we had decent number of people still in the program. So yeah, we should just correct this slide to like what it actually should look like. But that is a little bit worrisome that there's that big of a difference, treatment control. Okay, well, it doesn't get any better than that, so you're like taking my, like anything that was fun about this, you're taking it away from me. So this is the mathematical quality of instruction scores. So the MQI is an instrument that we developed mostly at Harvard, although a little bit at Michigan, and it covers 4 areas of what we would call ambitious instruction. So SPAMR is short for students' participation in mathematical reasoning. And that's kind of Common Core-ish. It's actually been since renamed to something as like Common Core-ish instruction. Richness is the sort of like multiple methods, explanations, with high levels being excellent enactment of those things. Working with students is like either conceptual remediation of students' misunderstandings or weaving kids' ideas into the lesson as it progresses. And errors is the teacher errors that get made during the lesson. And you can see that we basically have null results here. So what we did for this paper was we said to ourselves, okay, so no observation instrument is fabulous, and so maybe we missed something important going on in these classes. So this data had been generated by raters across the country looking at 7.5-minute segments and scoring each one using this very structured protocol. We said maybe we're missing something. So what we did was we looked at the 24 teachers who had participated in both year 1 video data collection and year 3 video data collection. So they'd already had some PD in year 1, but we'd sort of reasoned that they're getting another 80, 90, 110 hours. They should look even better by year 3, ideally. And so we looked across time. We assigned one observer, mostly my doc students, to each teacher, although I did a couple teachers myself, to watch all year 1 and year 3 data from each teacher, and then write basically a structured memo saying to what extent were kids participating more actively in the mathematical thinking of the lesson, to what extent was the teacher using different kinds of tasks, to what extent was were errors worse or better in this instruction. And what we found, and this is I'll talk about the results of this analysis throughout because it kind of helps inform what's going on, is that 4 teachers appeared to improve their instruction, but that their improvements were relatively shallow. We had one teacher who was asking many more why questions, and that was actually among the better thing that we saw. But we had, I'm going to have to go look at my notes on this one so I don't confuse these teachers. But for 2 other teachers, the changes were more minor. So there was slightly more mathematical richness for one, and better remediation of student misconceptions for another. So it wasn't like the observers were saying, oh, this has become a completely discussion-based classroom, even in these 4 teachers' classrooms, or like they're really dealing with the big mathematical ideas now. So we also looked at programs' impacts on students. We had this project administered assessment and the state assessment, and the results, and these are nicely done by the year. These results, and this is probably the most believable, it's the second year of the study, were basically 0. And we'll talk a little bit about power in a minute, but even if power is not an issue, these are pretty darn close to 0, like not meaningfully different differences in student achievement given the amount of professional development that teachers had gone through and the cost that a district would have paid for this program.
So can you just say why you developed your own assessment, given that you had the district one? Was it designed to measure some different set of concepts?
Yeah, so we designed it to try, I thought, mistakenly, that I would be able to get an assessment that was more aligned with what we think of as Common Core type stuff, like the why, like multiple choice assessment that just doesn't ask kids to compute, but like, why is this true? Or what is going on in this situation? We partnered with ETS to do it, and this is actually what's interesting. It gives me some insight into what's going on with PARC and Smarter Balanced. So ETS item writers have been trained a certain way, and they have this labor pool of people, and you give them a task, which is write more challenging and more interesting problems, and they've just been trained in a certain way. They have a certain capacity, they have a certain style of doing work, and it was very hard to kind of push them towards something different. I also think I underestimated how difficult this would be. So that's how we designed, that's one reason. The other reason was to have an assessment that was like an audit assessment, mainly for the other study, so that we were not only working on off of student state test results. So probably in the end, not something I'd recommend. It was also a pain to administer this thing. Go ahead.
I wonder if you could comment on the sense of how much of the quote-unquote program was the same or different as you went across teachers who were expected to implement the program. Was there a lot of variation in
what they got?
Sorry?
In what they received for professional development?
No.
Oh.
In how they were doing their math. Or putting it another way, how prescriptive was the Burns program? Did it leave a lot? Did it encourage teachers to improvise and to?
Yep, it's not prescriptive. It's a series. What they do is teach teachers these principles of what good instruction should look like, and there's a lot of videos of kids solving amazing math problems, and the teacher's going, oh, wow. Not prescriptive, and there are materials, and there are materials that the teachers are given. Like Marilyn Burns has written all these books, like algebra, like 4th and 5th grade algebra. Like here's some interesting problems and some thinking behind the tasks. But when we came into the district, what the district said in year 1 was, we are using math expressions. Don't mess with us. So the providers were told that they couldn't prescribe even the use of their own materials. They had to sort of develop something that would kind of overlay into math expressions. Now, interestingly, by the end of the study, the district was saying, go find stuff on the internet to the teachers. Here's a pacing guide, go find some lessons. So, and I'm going to talk about some of the churn that happened in this district. That was orthogonal to the program. The program didn't have a lot to do with that, but that was meant that they could not come in and kind of tell teachers, here's a wraparound, here's some curriculum, why don't you go ahead and do this kind of stuff.
So do you worry a little bit about referring to the teachers in the treatment group as, doing pretty much the same thing? If they're not doing pretty much the same thing, I would begin to worry about what the differences are in their variation of instruction in comparison to controls. Maybe part of the reason why you're not getting the effects that you would hope to find is because the actual nature and quality of instruction between these two groups, the program group and the control group, is not very dramatic.
I think that's what we found. That's certainly what the rating data told us. We haven't gone through all the control group teachers' instruction, except I've seen some of it just because I rated a lot of video for the project. And you know, this is like measuring instruction is really complicated because there's a lot of within teacher variability across lessons. And so that was a huge thing that when we were looking at people's video, like one day would be good, the next day would be a train wreck. But there was no sense in which the control group teachers were doing anything. Like, they looked like teachers from the district. Like all these teachers, we were doing actually another study with 4 other districts, and I could kind of identify this district when I pulled up a video. I'd be like, okay, yeah, like there's a routine and a rhythm in this district, and I can kind of like peg this district as that. And you'll see some of this is caused by district instructional guidance that was kind of put down on the teachers. So, all right. By the way, people should chime in. I encourage doc students to chime in, but I also will just cut people off if I need to keep talking. So, all right. So for a lot of people, null results are pretty much a disaster. Like I think for the teachers involved, like spending that much time in a program and then being told like I was part of a group that invested this heavily in the program and then it didn't help my kids would have been really and will be distressing to them, because when they signed up, that's what they wanted to do. They felt like, I'm doing this out of obligation to my kids. Like, I want to become a better teacher for my kids. The kids obviously don't benefit. The developers are devastated. For your CV, like, it's not such a great thing because it might be a little harder to get a null results study published. Although, interestingly enough, in the sciences, it suggested that the authors of these studies don't write them up, which is why they don't get published, and that it's not journal bias, which is kind of, there's been no studies in education of this, but I'd be curious to see whether that's also the case here. So I think a not untypical reaction is to sort of throw your hands up and say, like, I'm not going to be able to get this published. We don't really know what causes the null results, so I'm just going to kind of file this away. But it turns out that a lot of the educational RCTs coming back from the field, we've been at this for over 10 years now, have weak or null results. The figure is about 90% weak or null results. And so it would be nice if we can say more about this, right? Like we can kind of learn a little bit about what's going on that is preventing these things from being effective. So the Lemons article with the Fuchs provide one explanation in an ER article that was extremely well timed for our thinking, and that is improving achievement levels among control group children over time. So they have this great graph that kind of shows the effect size shrinking as the control group children actually get kind of treated with the same ideas. But we wanted to know whether there's other possibilities going on. And to do this, rather than kind of, we thought maybe we'll do this somewhat systematically and maybe reviewers will actually buy it. So what we did was to start by going into the educational implementation literature and finding the kinds of things that people talk about from the RAND change agent study that was done in the 1970s by Milburn McLaughlin and colleagues, all the way up to more recent writings in the 90s and early 2000s that kind of explains what, or we tried to classify the reasons that people come up with for null results. I'm not going to talk about these here. I'm going to talk about them as we go through each of them on the slides. And we also remained open to other possibilities as well. So for each of the potential reasons, we set out a test. And we said, well, if this is true, then we should observe this in the data. Or we can test it because we asked teachers. Or we can test it because we have this kind of pretest data or whatever. We were also open to new hypotheses as we read through observers' notes and field notes of our own, and we talked to the providers themselves about what they think was going on. So I'm just going to go through these, and we'll take them one by one and see what we come up with. So the first issue is not even on the slide. Is there insufficient statistical power? And this, again, is not my wheelhouse. This is more what Robin Jacob does for the project. And that's probably why it's blank, because we're still working on this section. But she's been writing a proposal. Even if it's a power issue, the effects are so small that I'm not convinced that even if we had more teachers and it were statistically significant, that it for me would be meaningfully significant, because this was a huge investment of dollars on the part and time on the part of the teachers. Another issue is this: do we have an insufficiently sensitive observation instrument? So that's why we undertook this we watched all the video to see whether we were missing something. And so we found some interesting positive and negative cases. So I don't think it's methodological in nature. It wasn't we had 2 tests, both a state test and an audit test, and it wasn't like there were big gains on the audit test and not the state test, because it shouldn't be called audit, but the sort of supplemental test. but the state test was, noisy or swamped because of test prep or something like that. That doesn't seem to be what's going on. Okay, so here's the first explanation that you find, and this is I'm a political scientist by training, and this is also drawn from the political science literature. And so in political science, and to some degree in the education implementation literature, you find lack of will as a big impediment to sort of program implementation. So, for a teacher who's not actively inclined toward the program, there's a lot of ways to kind of kill the program. Like, you don't show up at the PD. You show up at the PD because you like the cash stipend that comes, or the credits, or whatever teachers are getting from the PD, but you kind of passively reject it by putting it on the shelf, not trying it in your classroom, paying lip service and making superficial changes, but not making substantial changes. So that doesn't seem to be the case here. So when we did these exit interviews with the teachers, they all reported changing their instruction based on math solutions. So here's a typical quote. From working with math solutions, I really changed a lot of the way I do teach math because I let them explore more rather than showing them and me telling them up front. They explore, and they come to the realizations of concepts on their own. So that's been a lot of fun. So I would read this in the interview, and then I would read the observer's notes about the teacher, and the notes would say something like, kids have minimal input, teacher explains everything, kids go practice, and it was really like reading completely different reports. It suggests, though, that it's not a lack of will, and actually there were no comments in any of the interviews that suggested that the teachers didn't like the program or that they didn't buy into the program. They all saw themselves as actually enacting the program in their classroom. We thought maybe this could be an issue of attrition. As you saw, by the time the study ended, a lot of the teachers had dropped out. So we went back. We had some survey data that asked about the quality of the professional development that they attended this year in math. We asked that to treatment and control teachers. And the treatment teachers were extremely positive about their math professional development that year. And in fact, the teachers who left the program were more positive than the ones that remained in the program. So it doesn't seem to be lack of will. Another, which I thought might be true, is teachers' weak content knowledge. So the teachers in this district had content knowledge that was below the national norm, as we measured in a survey about 10 years ago. And we thought maybe it was only teachers with really strong content knowledge would be able to pull off the kind of instruction that Math Solutions was asking teachers to do. And so this was suggested to us because if you read David Cohen's Mrs. Oublier, which I do every year because I teach it, one of the things he kind of implicitly says in that piece is Mrs. Oublier just didn't understand enough of the math to know that what she was doing was not mathematically consequential. We thought maybe that was also the case here. We also did a bunch of case studies ourselves showing that teachers' enactment of mathematics teaching was strongly correlated with mathematical knowledge for teaching, including the quality of the task launch, explanations, use of representations, things of that nature. Our data, however, shows that baseline MKT was not a significant predictor of change in MKT or MQI scores. So teachers' quality of instruction, we were looking for teachers who walked in the door above average. Were they the ones who were really able to kind of kick it up a notch? And the answer was no. Okay, although you'll see content knowledge comes back in the story.
How big a group did you have that was kind of above average?
There weren't that many. I'm trying to think of maybe 20 teachers were above the national norm. This was a pretty impacted district in terms of teachers' knowledge for whatever reason, local labor pool, professional development. Okay, so lack of supportive materials. So one of the other things that comes out of this implementation literature is, maybe teachers wanted to change towards math solutions, but their curriculum wasn't supportive. And so certainly, I'm old enough that I lived through the 90s math reforms, and teachers in California were being asked to do completely different things in their instruction, but they initially didn't have materials with which to teach that way. And so I was just meeting with doc students, and a doc student said, it's theoretically possible that if you have conventional materials, you'd teach a great lesson, but it's much harder than if you actually have halfway decent materials, good investigation-oriented materials, and then you would go ahead and teach a better lesson. And I think that that's a sort of hypothesis that a lot of people have. You need the materials to enable the good teaching. So this district used math expressions, which supports some elements of the Common Core, but it's much more teacher-directed. It's much more top-down. The teacher presents some materials, and the kids the kids do some practice or some activity. And math solutions is different. It's supposed to start with a task, and then the mathematics is supposed to be drawn out of that student task. Like there should be a launch that makes sense of what the kids are doing, but then the kids are supposed to be engaging in some sort of mathematical reasoning. Now the kind of cool thing was we had this post-lesson log, and on it the teachers indicated whether they were using math solutions materials. For those lessons, we said, okay, there was this confluence between the professional development and the use of these materials. There's a little self-selection problem here, but like, let's assume away the self-selection problem. You should see if this was the issue that teachers using, when they use those math solutions materials, should be like kicking it, right? And the MQI is a 5-point scale from 1 to 5. 5 is best, 1 is worst. And you can see that there's not that many math solutions lessons, but they are not, they're well below the sort of average lesson quality as rated by these raters who are all over the country. So it didn't seem to be a kind of like, oh, they're missing the like coordinated materials that go with all these ideas. It seemed to be something else. And I was kind of chagrined to see that when the district said, go find stuff off the internet, that lesson quality was actually better. The talk students were talking about this too. That lesson quality was actually better than when they were using math expressions, which again is like probably some selection issues going on around here as well. But
Is that meaningfully different though?
Is this right here, or we haven't run the analysis yet. This to this is probably meaningfully different. This to this is probably not. So it's probably going to have to run some sort of multiple. I forget the name of these tests, but something to get at this. But just the eyeball test suggests that this is not it's not because there's a lack. It's not because teachers were not accessing these materials. And you can also see that they just weren't using the materials, even though they were told to like go find stuff on the internet. They weren't using the materials in any great number. So, and you know, to be fair, the math solutions people didn't force them to do so either, or even suggest it, because the district had said up front, like, don't mess with math expressions. We're all using math expressions. We don't want you replacing what you know, your materials with math expressions. So they were pretty lax about this.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Are there like periodic district assessments going on during the school year?
Oh, yes, we're getting to that. Yes. Okay. But first, we're going to go to difficulty of enacting complex teaching practice. So Mary Kennedy, I guess I missed this book, but I went back and I read it in 2006, proposed these ideas for why reform doesn't get enacted. And so she had all, like, very similar to this, like a whole bunch of hypotheses from the implementation literature. And then she was like, it's just darn hard. Like, that was like literally kind of hypothesis number 6. And so you read Magdalene Lampert's book on her teaching, and you sort of, the thing that you take away from that, at least my students, when they read it, they take away from that like, oh my God, that is hard. Like, I can't believe she's making so many complex decisions in the moment of teaching. You read David Cohen's book on, that might be the wrong year, but on ambitious instructional practice. You take away the same thing. And there's just a bunch of stuff that kind of has to be in place, right, before teachers can enact this, at least we think. Mathematical knowledge for teaching, knowledge of learners and the learning trajectories, skills, there's a whole bunch of skills, like responding to things in the moment, decision-making processes have to be there. And so this is why, partly why we went off and coded observers' comparisons of year 1 to year 3 lessons. So we were looking in particular for teachers who appeared to be moving toward ambitious instruction. Like the rater said, yeah, there was something different in year 3 versus year 1. And so of these 24 teachers total, we had one teacher who asked more why questions, but then she would accept procedural responses from the kids. Like she'd say, like when you're dividing, when you're simplifying a fraction and you're simplifying 2/4, you divide by 2/2, like why? Why does this work? And the kid would say, oh, you divide 2 by 2 and 4 by 2, and the answer is 1/2. And so she's asking, like, she's got the kind of like why thing in place, but she's not able to kind of elicit from students the actual mathematical underpinnings. 3 teachers were using more open-ended tasks, but devolved the demands of those tasks in the setup of those tasks by kind of telling kids what to do or telling them what was going on. And the other result was a slowing of the pacing of the lesson. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Or maybe I'm supposed to talk about that right here. Let me look at my notes. I think I'm supposed to talk about that right here. Oh, nope. Okay. So, yeah, the slowing of the pacing of the lesson. So teachers would take, one teacher took 28 minutes to introduce the launch of the task. And in the process had kind of devolved that launch into kind of like you roll the dice and then you write down the number rather than anything mathematical. Like the kids knew what to do in terms of the task. Like I'm sure you guys have all seen this, which is why I didn't bring video. But like the kids knew what to do to complete the task, but there was no sense of like what mathematically is significant about this. What are we trying to learn? What's the goal of the activity? And then the mathematics did not get threaded back into that lesson or any of these lessons that fell into this category. It was hard to see the teachers, I think it was hard for them to weave the mathematical points through their lessons when they were using the more open-ended tasks. And these were not necessarily the Math Solutions tasks. These could be anything that the teacher found on the internet or from Math Solutions. Okay, so that's the 4 teachers who we think made some changes. But then there's the like 17 teachers who didn't change at all. And we think that that has a lot to do with instructional guidance from the district. So this is kind of the hypothesis arises because David Cohen, has been writing for 20 years about instructional coherence and how you have to have very careful alignment between the different components that help teachers, support teachers in teaching. This district, although it was a friendly district, they really wanted Math Solutions. They'd worked successfully with Math Solutions in the past. A lot of the district leaders had been through Math Solutions, and the leadership that had not been through Math Solutions signed off on the test. What we saw actually was that what they were doing inadvertently, like not intentionally to harm the program, but the things that they were doing to improve instruction were running counter to the types of things that Math Solutions was asking teachers to do. So in the course of the study, the district, like many other districts, altered and increased its instructional guidance. So there was a new pacing guide that the poor math coordinator spent all summer one summer writing out this new pacing guide, right, to give to teachers. And teachers got it like August 20th, and then were told, like, create a curriculum, like create a year's worth of curriculum based on this pacing guide. Some teachers in the back up a minute. I forgot to tell you, we evaluated this because what we did at the exit interview was to say to teachers just a really open-ended question, like, was anything hard to implement? Were there any barriers to getting Math Solutions done? Okay, and so this is the kind of thing that they start talking about. So some teachers reported a limit on the number of minutes they could teach math, like 45 minutes is what I'm allowed to spend in my school. I can't do Math Solutions in 45 minutes. I can't let kids talk in 45 minutes. I have to teach them something. There were frequent benchmark assessments in this district that were kind of, teachers were geared toward preparing kids for those benchmark assessments. There was a new teacher evaluation program in year 3. It was value added based for the teachers in this grade, and the teachers were very stressed out about it. The district also had new requirements regarding the format and content of instruction over the course, just the 3 years of the study, introduced calendar math, which is, you're probably like, calendar math is like kindergarten. But somebody in the district decided that the 4th graders didn't know place value, and some 4th graders didn't know place. I'm sure some 4th graders did not know place value, but the solution was for every 4th and 5th grade teacher to spend 20 minutes with the popsicle sticks and the cans doing calendar math at the beginning of each lesson, and that was required. And then they also had a new policy about you had to teach to homogeneous groups. You had to divide up kids by level and then teach small groups rather than teaching whole class. And teachers in some schools, this was not all schools, but teachers in some schools said, I can't do Math Solutions in the context of small groups because I have 10 minutes with each small group and then I have to rotate them around and do something else with the kids. So teachers mention these as like major barriers to implementing Math Solutions. So the teachers say, I think the only thing is it's just about the program is it's time consuming. Like, I have an hour for math, this teacher had an hour. Like, I don't have all this time, and there's a pacing guide, and I've got to get on to the next thing. And ideally, it's not Math Solutions, the program, that's wrong about math instruction. It's just more the way the system is set up in the district and the state by expecting all these things to be done in a short amount of time. So my guess is, and I haven't mapped yet this for the paper, that a lot of the teachers for whom we saw no difference are the ones who are going to be, their interviews are going to be saying exactly this. So that's kind of a next step for our data. All right, so these are the variables that we kind of tested from the research literature. as I mentioned at the beginning, we're reading through an enormous amount of data, and stuff comes up, right? Like, I can't stop myself from noticing stuff. So the next two are things that I happened to notice and with my colleagues as I was going through this. So one is we're lumping this roughly under conditions experienced by professional developers. This is an exploratory hypothesis. So there are several issues that precluded ideal enactment of this program. There was rapid turnover with 3 superintendents in the 3.5 years that we were in the district. They had 2 different math coordinators and 2 K-8 math specialists. The math coordinator who retired after year 1 was replaced by a woman who was perfectly lovely, but the woman who had initially initiated the study, she was the person who could make everything happen in the district. Like, get on the phone with the people who are not showing up, make them show up, get the room, make everything happen. The woman in year 2 did not command that kind of respect from the district. The professional development providers had trouble finding rooms to run the PD in, right? It was, by the way, free to the district, which maybe was part of the problem. We paid for the subs. We had trouble getting approval for the subs because, rightly so, principals are like, why remove teachers from classrooms for professional development? They need to be in their classroom with their kids. There were changes in the state standards testing and teacher evaluation that went on. The test went online. Student tests went online. Teachers were very stressed about that. And there was a lack of district support for the Math Solutions wanted to do kind of an online between session check-in with teachers to talk about what was going on, and the district wouldn't open up their firewall to make that happen. So, so that's kind of stuff that happens to that probably is not an atypical story as you walk into a district with an intervention, but the intervention had no real way to deal with it. So if you're Bob Slavin and you're designing SFA, you design these kind of arms of your, not arms of a study, but arms of your intervention that go out and kind of deal with this kind of stuff, shield the intervention from the outside world. But these are professional developers. They didn't have that kind of purchase in the district. They were supposed to be there to help improve instruction, not to fundamentally change what was going on in the district. Another thing, so I was going to say, before I get into the other issues, another thing that happened, and this is on us, was that we within school randomized so that we could afford to collect video. And that made school level follow-up more challenging in the sense that teachers couldn't meet in their grade level teams and talk about the professional development. I'm not sure that would have made a big difference, but that was definitely something that was on us as designers of the study. And then there was this other group of explanations that were kind of co-constructed by the developers and by the culture of the district. And I don't know what to call this except there was a culture of nice going on in this district. And we saw this mainly when we went through our notes of the professional development observations itself. We went down there pretty frequently to observe the PD. So for instance, there was really no bearing down very hard, even though the developers themselves said, we've got to teach teachers math. They had a very strong theory that teachers didn't have a lot of mathematical knowledge, and they were convinced that part of their mission was to teach teachers the math. We saw them enacting tasks with teachers. Teachers would do tasks, but the mathematical elements of that task were not there. It actually almost exactly mirrored the problems that we saw in the failed teacher lessons, where the kids were doing the task but not talking about the math. So the teachers, here's an example would be pentominoes. I'm looking at Lonnie because I'm not sure. I have a vague vision of what these are, but they're squares, and you get 5 of them. And you have to find all the arrangements that you can make with the sides touching, or
Actually, pentagon tiles.
oh, pentagon tiles. Okay, so you have to find all the arrangements of these things, and so teachers found the arrangements. There's 12, and then discussion drifted off back toward the revival element of the intervention, rather than what was interesting mathematically about that task, how you find 12 for pentominoes. I assume there's septominoes and other omino types. Can you make a table? How would you, and predict something? How do you know that you found all of these? How can you be sure? Which are deeply mathematical questions, but that didn't really get pushed on at all. In other cases, I was there once for one session where the providers, again, they're giving the teacher the task, here's some Cuisenaire rods to solve some fractions problems. And the teachers at my table could not solve the problem with the rods. Couldn't do it. 5 teachers, it's the end of the PD, they couldn't solve it. The provider, I asked afterwards, I said, did you notice that the teachers at my table couldn't solve the problem with the manipulatives? And she said, yeah, I know. But there's nothing I could do about it. I felt in the moment I couldn't stop.
Isn't that more the pedagogy of professional
I think it's interactive, right? So the professional development providers, what they say is, we need these people to come back. We can't get them to come back if we push them too far. And Suzanne Wilson's written about this too, like very old paper from the 90s, but I think that it's something about both the design, but also the design that's in reaction to their work with teachers. And I don't know how to express it more articulately, but it's kind of my sense. The other thing that we saw in looking for our notes is that there was no modeling of high quality mathematical practices. So they would get out the array models and the multiplication problems, and they'd kind of go through it. But we know a lot from psych about how to do that well. It's attention to tiny detail that matters a lot when you're doing that. Are you modeling exactly what the kids said? Are you linking sort of, here's one partial product computation, here's the partial product shown in an array model? That kind of level of detail was never touched upon. It was sort of here's some blocks, here's how you'd put it up, and then it was kind of assumed that teachers would be able to do that. There was also an unwillingness to critique practice, and, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the modeling.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the Maryland Burns, there's a lot of video
Yep.
in that. Were there videos showed, or was it always just...
There were videos showed, yeah.
But it was never look what you just did there.
There was never a bearing down on the content of the mathematical content of the video. It was almost always about the kid engagement with the video. And the videos were cut in such a way that that was what was meant to come out often.
There wasn't any meta talk about did you notice that teacher move? And when I think about pedagogy of teacher education,
It was more just buying in. Look how great this is.
It was a lot of buying in, yeah. It was a lot of convincing teachers to do something different in their classroom.
you got your answer right there. I mean,
Yeah.
revival meeting plus nice isn't going to get you any.
I think this is the kind of the intervention failed because it was not powerful story. Yeah. This is why it's exploratory, because I don't know that people write about badly designed interventions. So at least I didn't find when we were kind of looking through the implementation. It is actually, that's not fair. To be fair, there is a literature on some of these things that we did in the 70s did kind of suck, and maybe shouldn't have worked even if we were right. But we saw the same thing with unwillingness to critique practice. But I think it has to do with both the PD design, but also about what the teachers in the room are kind of willing to accept. And so the providers felt pretty strongly that they could not get down and dirty with the teachers over this kind of stuff. And yeah. No, go ahead.
It seems like that's partly that they don't have these long-term relationships. They do this 2 days in the summer and then 4 days over the school year. And in order to really have that kind of, have you thought about this?
Right. They have to be more there. Right. I think that's true. But the other thing that your question made me think is they're motivated by keeping their organization afloat, right? They're motivated by somebody tells the next district over, oh, they were great. The way that that's going to happen is the teachers come out feeling really happy with what they experienced. So.
Was there any partnership sort of PD design in terms of, was the district math specialist ever
They were always,
leading this PD?
they never co-led, but they were always there in the room. So they knew what was going on, and they were always supportive of what was going on. So they were signaling to the teachers, we value this.
But a typical teacher wouldn't think, oh, I can't ask them because they're gone today, so I'll ask my district leader who knows the same amount of stuff.
Right. I actually don't know the answer to that question, whether teachers were discussing it with the district. My sense is the district math coordinator and the specialist were actually rewriting standards and dealing with data and all the administrative stuff that go with that role now, rather than helping teachers. I was just reviewing an article for a journal, and hopefully not one of you wrote this article, but of 7 coaches. They had data on 7 coaches, only 1 was coaching. So the others were sort of they were subbing, they were, yeah, anyway, that's the other, anyway.
I didn't write that.
Yeah. So anyway. So the last sort of exploratory thing that I came up with in reading through all this data was, there's also a sense in which there was a poor fit between the intervention and what the teachers actually needed. And this kind of goes to some of the missed work of let's find out what the sort of things that need working on are in this district and then fix them. The providers, I'm not sure had a sense of that, although they certainly would have said, like, oh yeah, I see that as a problem, had we shown them some of the video. So I went through all the year 1 notes from our observers, not the raters, but the people that use these teachers as cases. And it just suggested that there was a huge variability in what went wrong in a lesson. And this is true. I watched tons and tons of video. There's many, many things that can fail in a math lesson, and they are sometimes not related to each other. So first, the nice thing is some teachers already had really high-level practice, right? So then you're treating people that don't really, they could still improve, but they're not the people that you want to treat for maximal impact. Second, the developers were right in that there was a lot of kind of passive kids sitting around and not being engaged in mathematical thinking. So they were onto something about that. But we saw many other serious issues. And many of these were the types of things that made ambitious instruction difficult. So we noticed a lot of the observers' notes said things like, the teacher could not explain the math clearly and accurately. So if I brought a video, what I would have probably brought, and I apologize for not bringing video and thus being boring, but you've seen this, I'm sure. So the teacher is explaining perimeter to kids, and she sort of says, oh, that's the distance around. Okay? And so if you give this teacher a test, she could surely compute the perimeter. She went on to compute the perimeter. She knows what the perimeter is. But the quality of that communication with the kids, like she doesn't specify 2D objects. She doesn't specify that you're measuring the edges. Like the distance around could be like anywhere in space around that figure. And that, I think, might be a student confusion that arises with this, because sometimes you see kids trying to measure with tiles, like measure kind of area around the edge. So it was that kind of like, they can't actually express the ideas even though they know them. There's something about the sort of verbal quality of instruction that's not happening. Teachers had a lot of trouble responding to students' conceptions or comments and misconceptions. So like a kid would say something really beautiful, like, can you have a negative remainder? And the teacher would be like, enough with that. Or the kid would come up with a very common misconception, and the teacher would sort of be like, nope, the right answer is 3. And so it was kind of the using of the kids' ideas, even though this was a huge part of the intervention itself. Like there's something about like learning about that in the theory that didn't translate into skill here. Or sorry, no, this is just what's wrong. So this would not have been treated by the program itself, because they didn't have any skill element here. Do you have a question, Mimi?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about this and thinking about the ideas kind of around like the pedagogy of PD and the culture of nice. Like I believe both of those things, but I'm still stuck on the teacher's capacity to change. Right. And,
Yeah.
Right. So that yeah. I guess it's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
I'm not
It's like
convinced if the PD had been a better fit that we would have seen change.
because the PD was weak, or because
Of the teacher capacity.
Yeah, I think that has to be part of the story. And that's why I was surprised when that MKT, like, is it an interaction between like starting value, and we came up with null results there. But so another thing that we saw in year 1, or I saw in year 1 in the notes, was like teachers had a lot of trouble launching high demand tasks in ways that enable students to like get into the work in a mathematical way, as opposed to like roll the dice 50 times kind of way. I think everybody in the room is probably, if you're a policy person, maybe you haven't seen this, but everybody in the math ed world has seen this, so I won't talk about that more. Maintaining the mathematicalness of the tasks throughout the lesson was just often not present. And then the pacing of the lessons, like often, and this has been something that's true in a lot of the other districts that we've been working in with video, like there's very, very, very little material that gets covered. And I'm not saying like I want them to solve 50 math problems. I would solve one problem but have a really wonderful discussion about the mathematics that's in that one problem. They were solving one problem but with no discussion. So there's some way in which there's been an interact, like this is just completely me talking smack, but there's a sort of way in which there's been this interaction of us saying like, here's some cool materials, like, you know, you can work on this really interesting problem, but the teacher is not really knowing what the mathematics of the problem is, and then enacting the problem in a very procedural top-down kind of way that just results in a lot less math getting done as opposed to a traditional classroom. I just violated the NCTM code of ethics by saying such a thing, but that's kind of one of my hypotheses about what we've done. Okay, so this is the scorecard. You can see we were able to kind of reject at least three of the hypotheses. Lonnie's convinced of something. about this being about the PD, but I kind of think of them, it's like I'm having trouble, and this is coming out in the fact that I'm having trouble writing the paper, but, or finishing up the paper. I kind of think of these things as being really connected to each other. It's like two sides of the same coin. Paul?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Because when you're talking about the challenges of ambitious practice, I think it's in the context of this program.
Mm-hmm.
And what the expectations were for these teachers in this program, this PD program, were completely overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't organized around a set of instructional materials.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's right.
So they're supposed to make those up. As somebody who's done curriculum, developed, it's incredible.
I know.
Just to start with.
Yep.
And you can go on through it. You mentioned launching a task just now.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't focus on specific practices.
That's right.
Actually practicing how you get good at that.
That's right.
And so on. So the expectations for teachers, yeah, I agree. In the context of this PD program, what they were expecting teachers to learn, no chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a lack.
Yeah.
What?
Where would you get a foothold in what they did other than being excited?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it was missing a technical component of teaching, which is like there is a skill in listening to what kids are saying and responding appropriately, or there is a skill in launching a task in a way that kids can work on the mathematics of the problem and understand what they're doing as connected to the math. And there was nothing in the program that would have gotten them there. So it's kind of it's the difficulty of the task that was asked, the inadequacy of the program as it was designed, and to some degree also this, the fit. Like, I don't think professional developers go in and say like, oh, let's like make teachers pick up the pace a little bit, or like, that's not, I don't think that that's commonly thought of as a like important outcome of PD, but that was certainly a big part of what was needed in this district, or just make it more mathematical. Okay, so I just have like remaining puzzles that I can't work out, or because I'm in the middle of writing the paper, have not been able to work out. So one thing is the teachers swore up and down, like, I've changed my practice. Like I said, like you'd read the interview, you'd be convinced, and then you go look at the notes on the video, or in some cases I'd seen the teacher's video, and I would just think like, these are two different people. And then I'd check the IDs, like call up Robin and be like, is this really the same teacher? Yeah, they're the same teacher.
I hope you published just that paper. Because
But I can't answer the question though, so I can't really publish it.
different question. The
Oh.
question is, what is the relationship between teacher self-reports and our observations of teacher practice?
Mm-hmm.
Because I cannot tell you how many grant proposals I review. You doing that? Well then, Charlotte. I mean, like, that's the most common measure of improvement is teacher self-reports, and those of us who hang out in class, like, this is a totally unsurprising finding.
Yeah.
But I haven't personally read that paper, so please someone write that paper.
Yeah,
So then
and
we
one
can
of the
cite that paper.
so you know about the MISS project.
Yeah.
We employ a few of similar measures.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other ones that we use is also to try and get a hold of teachers' vision of what they are trying to do,
Mm-hmm.
what their vision of good instruction is.
Yeah.
And so a few of us on the project are working on a paper where we ran a similar analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers' self-reports of the extent to which they've changed after professional development and their classroom instruction as observed by researchers. And there's just zero correlation anyway
Yep.
that we cut it. So one of our questions was maybe the way that they understand what they're supposed to be doing
Mm-hmm.
is different enough from what we're looking for in our instructional quality assessment that they're shooting for different things. So when they
Yeah.
say, well, yeah, I've changed, maybe they have, but in ways that we are not looking for.
Yeah.
That did not significantly moderate the relationship. So it's not even about language.
Mm-hmm.
It's something else.
It's something else. That's partially why we went back and did the case studies, because we thought we had this exact same intuition that you did, like maybe we're just missing something, like completely missing something. I think, so now that you've scratched me, I'm gonna like give my 2 cents on this. So there's something interestingly cognitive about this, in the sense of like, when I think about this problem, I think Jim Spallon and the sort of paper that he wrote on cognition and teachers' cognition. The teachers have different we know that each teacher has a different yardstick for measuring instruction. Like if you think about everybody having their own like yardstick, and some people's yardsticks are like this and some people's yardsticks look like that, right? Like teachers are very, not very reliable in being able to report change. But the other thing I think might be going on is that teachers reinterpret their previous practice in light of the new ideas. Because, like I said, it's religious revival. And if you have bought in, if you believe, you want to believe that you are good, that you are a good teacher. And so they start to take things that like we would see as very generic, kind of like you're asking questions and the kids are giving one-word answers, and they start to think of that as actually enacting higher quality practice because they need to have something in that bin to feel okay about what they're doing.
Well, and also if in the professional development, if what they were being sort of maybe unwittingly trained to look for was student engagement, if they get more student engagement in their classrooms, then it's likely, I mean, that might be
Right, maybe the kids are saying,
themselves,
giving more one-word answers.
more, maybe kids are working
Yeah.
in groups more.
Right,
And if that's what they were trained to look for
right.
in the models that they were given, then
You should be able to see if that's happening.
Yeah, but not without watching the video again.
I know, next word was graduate students.
Yeah, we're out of money, so that's the only slight problem. That would be me watching the video. But yeah, I think that's a good, I mean, resolving this problem I think is kind of interesting, and understanding the mechanism is also very interesting because we have gone on and we now have our own professional development for teachers, and it's coaching based, but a huge part of what we do with teachers is fix their yardstick to be our yardstick. And like we norm them watching video constantly, including on the day of the coaching. They watch a clip, they have to score the clip with us so that we're sure, like, okay, and they are so critical of other teachers' video, like so critical, like, oh my God, that teacher did all the talking, and I can't believe she didn't let the kids get a word in edgewise. And so our coaches, what they do is they transcribe the video, and then they transcribe the coaching clip that they've pulled from that teacher. And the teacher often will look at that clip, look at the transcript of her own clip and be like, oh my God, I just taught the same way, didn't I? And so it's that kind of like putting them on our scale then can begin the conversation rather than like us saying, oh, get the kids to talk more, and then saying, oh, I already do that, right? And so we've really intentionally kind of designed that into the intervention that we put together, or we are putting together right now. So anyway, that's a kind of a digression. Building a better mousetrap, like my question upon ending the study is like, is this kind of mousetrap even worth it? Like, there's other forms of professional development, like I would say coaching, that show pretty promising and stronger results than this kind of this is pretty close to practice, but it is not embedded in practice in the sense of you guys were pointing out, there's no rehearsal of practice, there's no chance to learn any of the technical pieces of teaching in what was going on here. So a different kind of mousetrap is probably what I would do, and I would not spend $5 million on anything of this sort again. And then the sort of last thing takes us back is is this kind of work worth doing? Can you learn anything from examining your null results study and trying to figure out, what was it that was a sort of contributing factor to the null results here?
Can I answer your last question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, if you go back to your scorecard, I think the answer is clearly yes, because as I was trying to keep track of all of your hypotheses and where you were kind of coming out, so I was really glad to see it this way.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, well, if from the point of view of another district who was going to say, well, should I do this thing? Should I transplant it into my district? Well, the things that are at the bottom suggest no, because this professional development is not very good.
Mm-hmm.
But what if those things had been in place? You still got some bullets here that are sort of suggesting even a really good professional development wouldn't have worked in this context because the district had a bunch of other policies that were being implemented at the same time that this couldn't have fit into. It could be a fabulous professional development opportunity, but the district wasn't ready for it. So to me, that's part of the real value here is seeing, is it the developer's fault? Is it something about, the district's fault?
Mm-hmm.
And you're being able to lay it out and look at it from multiple points of view, rules out. You often see these null results where you don't get these kinds of answers, and the developer walks away saying, well, it would have worked in a different context. If we'd only had it somewhere else, it would have worked. And the district walks away saying, well, this professional development, wasn't, well, they never think it's not good, but,
they never do, I know.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
they still love it.
but I really like seeing it laid out this way because you can't necessarily answer all of your bullets,
right?
But you can provide some good suggestive evidence.
Right, a vote of confidence.
So I like that.
Okay.
So I'm wondering how many of these, this great list that you have, how many of these did somebody think about before the study?
So, did we think about or somebody?
Like you all, and I just feel like some of these things could have been
Oh, yeah. Oh, the study or of the program?
The study.
Okay, just being clear. Yeah.
For example, like if you had thought, oh, maybe this program isn't going to fit with this district, you could have thought about implementing this in multiple districts and tested that, for instance. So there are other things that could have been done at the design phase if
Right.
you could have thought about some of these in advance. And I'm just thinking of this as someone that does a lot of field experiments that I sometimes don't do a good job of thinking through all the implications.
Yeah. So I think so. This district, as I said, was really enthusiastic about the program. Like they kind of bought the Kool-Aid, or drunk the Kool-Aid, bought the, I don't know, whatever they did, but they were really.
They didn't have to pay, right? So they just drunk it.
They didn't have to pay. It was free to them, but it was also something that they saw as having been beneficial in the past to their teaching, and they wanted to offer this to a wider set of teachers, right? So I don't think it was a fit issue, but I think you're right in sort of, like, I think maybe where you're going is, can you design for the study? Yeah, okay, so it's kind of complicated in results. Like, this also has to do with like how you design studies to give robust results. Like, I think this probably doing one thing in one district is not such a hot idea. And one thing that I've been trying to advocate for recently is, rather than running these big RCTs and spending millions of dollars running RCTs, run tiny little RCTs where you vary the design of the program. Like, we have one that we're doing right now where it's video-based, and in one condition, the teachers watch their own video, and in the other condition, teachers watch stock video. And then actually we cross that with high facilitation situation where the facilitator's like on teacher's case about sticking with the rating protocol, versus low facilitation where teachers run it themselves. They're introduced to the protocol, but then they run it themselves. And so what we're able to learn from this, which was not an expensive study, and we did this multiple groups within each condition, what we're able to learn is that when you sort of let teachers take it over, the teachers really want to agree with each other and move on. Like, they sort of say very quickly, like, oh, everybody gave that a 3. All right, moving on. Or you gave it a 2, like, can you just come up to a 3? Moving on. Where the facilitator does not let people do that, right? And like presses on that exact discussion that teachers have to have. What was that kid saying, and did that teacher respond appropriately to what that kid was saying, right? And so, but anyway, going back to the sort of design piece, I think that that's much more where my thinking is now about where we should be doing studies, rather than like single, like this was, because it was so long, it was a very expensive RCT. And we also administered our own assessment, which was added to the expense as well. Maybe?
So, I mean, I see Brent's point, but I want to push back on it a little in the sense that, and you have a couple of great articles on this, right? That most of the PD that is enacted in districts, so if we think about business as usual PD, this is much, much better than that. So I think actually looking at what happens if you try and improve, and I would have said it, I would have thought I would have drunk the Kool-Aid at the front end. I would have said this seems like an improvement upon, the one shot, all the different kind of bad or superficial kinds of PD that we have. So I think we do learn from this.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name.
I'm Charlotte.
Charlotte, okay. Right, writing the paper on, yes,
That's right.
solving this problem about teachers' enthusiasm.
Coming Memorial Day weekend. So one of the things that I was thinking, kind of in response to your question, is at any point did you feel, or you guys as a team feel an ethical dilemma doing this as an RCT? Like, for instance,
Which kind of ethical dilemma are you fishing for? Because there were like lots.
So I'm thinking, like, as the PD provider, I would have said, well, tell me what, I mean, you're looking at the videos, tell me what they to focus on.
Well,
And I mean,
right.
not that happened in the study.
Yeah.
But I mean, from the other side of it, like, why don't we tell them that their teachers actually need to focus on this? But that's, that kind of breaks that fourth wall, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering, like, maybe it's not necessarily building a better mousetrap. Maybe it's a few different kinds of mousetraps, right? Like, one of them being, like, at what point do we intervene? And,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we could have told them about the video results. Like, I hadn't analyzed the video in that way. Like, we don't actually even have a pacing. The pacing was the big surprise. We don't measure that on the MQI. It was sort of like, after watching a lot of videos, I was like, oh my God, these are all so slow. But we could have told them about like teachers' MKT results, because we knew the MKT scores and the performance right up front when they took the pretest. And we knew kind of like, they know this versus they don't know that. like we could have given them feedback, but we wanted to test the program as they would enact it in a normal situation. So this kind of goes to Brent's, in a typical district, what would be the effect? Probably better than average situation because the district was enthusiastic. What would be the outcome for teachers and students? All right, we talk about it later. Go ahead.
So you keep mentioning that this district was like a friendly district, right?
Yeah.
They've used this PD program in the past, and I'm just curious because I'm assuming if you had null results this time, you probably didn't see a lot of change before. I know you weren't in there, but I'm just curious as like what criteria they're using. Why do they feel so good about this PD? And like if you were to ask them even now, like how did this PD go or how is it going? Like what would they say? Have you shared this with them?
The district? Yeah, we sent the report to the district, like the paper.
Surprising to them in any way, or
Yeah, it was disappointing, I think, to everybody involved because I think that they felt like this is a really effective program. And so what's interesting is what they see is some of the teachers that had gone through the program in the past had become leaders in the district, had become sort of math leaders in the district. And, sorry? They were preaching, but they also saw like, if there were 150 teachers that went through the PD, there were 15 that became math leaders and sort of universally accepted, and that was evidence of success, but that was not the average impact of treatment, right, among the 150 teachers that initially went through the program. So that, I think, is it's a complicated kind of story. And I was really, the other thing I was going to say to Brent was a lot of the other stuff that came down, like the guidance and things like that, I think is also just very typical of what districts are doing these days as they scramble. Like they are trying everything they can. They're barraged by these providers of interventions. They're pressed for results, and so they do stuff like everybody's got to teach calendar math for 20 minutes a day now. Or I was on the phone with a district in Wisconsin, and we said to them, like, what's going on with your mathematics instruction? And so they're using investigations, but they also have RTI, and they have they have frequent benchmark assessments, which are probably kind of junky, right, from what we know about these things, but they hold the teachers to the benchmark assessments. And there's just a lot of stuff that districts are consuming mainly from us, actually, some of it's commercial, but some of it's us producing stuff that are creating this incoherence, which is then what we saw, I'm pointing at the slide that's not up there, about this, the kind of pacing stuff and the benchmark assessments and whatnot. So, we've conspired to create kind of a bad situation. Allie?
So one thing I was thinking about is this sort of adds to this literature of disappointing PD results.
Yeah.
Right? But there's emerging results on coaching that looks like a much better
Yes,
investment.
right.
Do you think that's actually something districts will take up in a meaningful way?
Well, so not that I want to sell an external coaching program, which I do actually, but the thing is that, like Lonnie said, the coaches that get hired by the districts don't coach. Maybe 50% of them coach, and the ones that are actually coaching, I'm not sure how effective they are because it's a kind of I need to become friends with the teacher before I can say anything critical about the teacher. So I think the coaching programs that have been successful have been the ones where the teacher videotapes themselves, they mail that sucker off. Well, that's not true. I think Pat Campbell's is there were local coaches, but they were controlled by her and not the district, not the school. So it's if the district were to say oh, coaching works, let's hire a bunch of coaches or promote teachers to be coaches, I don't think that that's going to work at all. But if they're able to say, let's set up a situation where there's external accountability and there's external objectivity, and teachers walk in with that expectation that they're going to be seriously critiqued, then I think it could work.
I don't know if somebody on our team's written a paper about this or something we just chat about, but it seems like who the coach reports to is really
Yes,
confidential.
yeah, totally. Totally.
Lindsay? Okay.
Yeah.
If they report to the principal, then it's really easy for them to fill administrative gaps,
Yep.
become substitute teachers,
Yep.
do these grunty things. But if they're reporting to somebody in the central office, then
Yep.
they sort of have a different kind of clout status in the school and can work on it.
Yeah, actually, one of the districts that we're in for the other study, the district did it both ways, and the math coordinator, she's very talented, and she had this cadre of coaches, which she was not sure that they were all good coaches, by the way. So she, had been watching them and kind of well, if you want to talk to the good ones, here's the ones I recommend. But for a period of time, then those coaches were put underneath the principals, and she says it completely then rolled out in that situation where the principals were using them to do all sorts of random stuff. And then she got them back. So.
I was wondering that
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of wondering where the principal was.
So the principles, yeah, like I should add that to one of the slides. So I'm not sure which slide I'd add it to because I'm not sure how to categorize this, but the program had a principal component where the principals were supposed to attend PD as well as the teachers, and they were supposed to come with the teachers for a day and then like have their own thing during another portion of time. Principals just didn't come. So
But I mean, where is that in your theory of where stuff breaks down?
it's probably, my guess would be it would end up on the district instructional guidance slide somewhere, or the churn in the district, or sort of mixed messages to teachers about how to teach math.
The collective part, though, the collaboration part that, like, a lot of people talk about,
Mm-hmm.
PD, write about, that's not on your scorecard either.
Oh, like the lack of teacher collaboration? Yeah. Well, that's kind of there in that, like, it's stuck in that because of the study design, they didn't collaborate. So, that I also don't, it's like it's kind of on us. I'm not sure where to put that because that's not about the intervention. My guess is things wouldn't have been that much different just from hearing the teachers talk about what they did talk about in their groups, which was like, oh, we've got to teach fractions tomorrow. Let's go find some stuff. So, all right. Any other thoughts? All right. Thank you.
Perfectly timed.
Oh, is it? Yeah, it's true.